You were born with a congenital condition called sacral agenesis. Medical professionals did not believe you would make it, but your mom saw you surviving.
Back then, it was very traditional for the answer to be, she's not going to have a quality of life. And that really was the news that was given to my parents when I was born. My parents didn't know what else to do other than advocate for my able-bodied twin sister and I to have the exact same thing. My mom, she used her voice, and I was the only student with a disability integrated in mainstream classrooms. So that was a huge deal back then.
They enrolled you in wheelchair tennis at 4. You went to Chico State where you earned your bachelor's degree and then moved to Belgium for 2 years to earn your master's. Was fear even an issue for you?
We look at somebody with a disability, we define them, and we miss the human being. The no ways, absolutely not, do not include, do not adapt, do not invite, do not befriend, do not love, do not hire. It's the fear and the pity in which we see people living with disabilities through. It's the judgments that we place on what our abilities are.
Yeah.
We need to believe in things that we don't.
Welcome back to Humanity Unlocked. I am your host, Kimberly Daya, and I am here with a guest who I have been so excited about recording with from the moment we met. Her name is Alycia Anderson. I had been a subscriber to Alicia's podcast and had been listening and following her on social media for several months. I finally decided to reach out, and I was thrilled when she responded. And just to give you guys a brief background, Alycia is a motivational speaker and podcaster. She's a fellow TEDx speaker. She is a tennis player, a cyclist, and an identical twin who has been in a wheelchair since birth. Alycia has been featured in countless magazine articles, on news shows, and speaks to communities, companies, and various organizations across the nation about the benefits, principles, and practices of accessibility and inclusion. My favorite line of her bio is, Alycia right-sizes everyday obstacles to open your mind to a world of possibility, and that's how she rolls. So,
yeah, it is.
Welcome to the show, Alycia Anderson. Okay, I would love to talk about the first few years of your life. Are you ready to just get right into it?
Let's do it.
Okay, because I feel like this is going to be a long one, and I don't want to waste any time because I know we're going to talk about it all. As I said, you and your twin sister Regina, you guys were born. Were you born in 1975? Did I have? I have that right? Okay, I'm going off memory on that. To your parents, who at the time were 23, you were born with a congenital condition called sacral agenesis, which, tell me if this is right, it underdevelopment of the spinal cord?
Yep.
Okay, at the sacrum, which is the lowest portion of the spine that forms the joints with the hips. Initially, doctors advised your parents against life-saving and reconstructive surgeries because at that time, 1975, medical professionals did not believe you would make it, but your mom saw you surviving, and your parents fought and advocated for you to receive the care you needed. So let's start there. What can you tell us about like the first 5 to 10 years from what you've been told and what you remember?
About my disability specifically?
About your parents and everything that because I know that's a big part of your story.
Yeah. I mean, when I was born back then, it was very traditional for the answer to be not possible. She's not going to have a quality of life. And that really was the news that was given to my parents when I was born. And that path took a lot of advocacy. My disability is considered somewhat severe for sure. And it did take a lot of surgeries, a lot of reconstruction, a lot of maintenance. Mm-hmm. I oftentimes say I'm a science project that has gone right.
So true.
But, I'm grateful for all of that as well. Yeah. But to have those opportunities to live, it really did take advocacy from my parents too. Because
what would have been the norm? Like what did doctors advise?
The advice was she's not going to have a quality of life. Do not give her the surgeries that she needs. Don't put her through that. She will not survive.
Just flat out.
Put her in an institutionalized setting. And, and that it's very typical back then. Yeah. And it still is very typical around the world, honestly, today.
Okay.
And so, yeah, it took a lot of advocacy to say no. And it was right. I was born right when the disability rights movement was kind of gaining traction. So there was some advocacy in the air of advocating for people with disabilities that you traditionally would not have prior, I guess.
Right.
And so that's what my parents did. And went through a ton of surgeries and survived. And
what's interesting is that not only did they not know because in 1975, they didn't know they were going to be having twins.
Correct.
And they didn't know one of the twins would be disabled.
Correct.
So this was a full surprise on Labor Day, on your birthday.
Surprise!
Surprise. You spent 1 to 2 years in and out of the hospital getting these surgeries, reconstructive surgeries on your legs and feet, internal surgeries, all the things. And at the time you started school, the norm back then was also for disabled kids to be segregated to like a different classroom. Is that right? Like no matter the disability?
No matter the disability, all children with disabilities were segregated into a separate classroom and play area. And, when I was born, my parents didn't know what else to do other than advocate for my sister, my able-bodied twin sister, and I to have the exact same things. They were 23. They were just navigating this new life that they really had no idea about. And so that
kind of just going based off intuition. Well, Gina gets it.
Totally.
Alicia should have it too.
Totally.
Kind of just, being guided by their intuition.
Yeah, and so my mom went into every school or activity that was there, and she used her voice, and I was the only student with a disability integrated in mainstream classrooms in elementary school. That was a huge deal back then. Like, that was an unseen. And she really gave me those first opportunities to be integrated and included in environments where
they hadn't before.
Yeah.
So she was the one that really fiercely advocated for your inclusion and integration. Were there other disabled kids like in your school who were not given that same opportunity?
Yes.
So you didn't set that they didn't go, well, Alicia's doing great, let's maybe look at these other.
No.
Wow, but that didn't stop your mom.
No. And I was young back then, so I can't remember really when the integration happened, but for others, but I don't remember ever being integrated with other students when I was in elementary school. Mm-mm.
Segregated with?
They were all segregated.
Oh, they were segregated. Okay, gotcha.
Yeah.
And also too, well, actually I'll get to that in a minute, but they enrolled you in wheelchair tennis at 4?
Yeah, so my parents wanted to find activities that we could do together as a family. Again, kind of advocating for opportunities for both my sister and I. And they had seen a story in the newspaper about the founder of wheelchair tennis who was just kicking off the sport at that time in like 1979 or something like that. And he was given a clinic near our house. And so my mom took my sister and I to go watch. And she approached him after the like exhibition that they were having. And back then it was no like sports chairs, all like hospital, they're playing in really old equipment. And she approached him and said, I'd love for you to teach my daughters how to play tennis. And he took both of us on, my sister and I, and started to teach us to play tennis. And I actually was the first junior to play wheelchair tennis with the founder. And my mom kind of like facilitated that. And from that, he developed camps and sports programs for kids and equipment. I had the first tennis chair ever built for children with disabilities. It's like my claim to fame and history. So,
yeah, because you went on you kept playing.
Yeah, I kept
Did Regina
playing.
keep playing?
No.
And you were a little, I mean, in terms of athletic ability and proficiency, you were...
I'm more competitive.
More inclined?
Yeah. I'm definitely more competitive than she is. So I was more inclined to play sports.
Did it come naturally to you? Do you feel like the hand-eye?
I get, yeah. I mean,
that's a skill.
I just interviewed Brad Parks, who is the founder, on my podcast, and he said to me, "You were always so natural." So I guess I was. Coach said so.
I think that hand-eye thing's a skill. Honestly, because my daughter has great hand-eye. She doesn't play any sports. My son played sports. He has no hand-eye, and so it's just funny because she has the skill, but she doesn't want to use it. He doesn't have the skill, but he tried to anyway. I do believe it's
What was really good, though, I mentioned to that about. What was so foundational about playing wheelchair tennis when I was that age was it was something that we could do together inclusively. Like you can sit and play and you can stand and play. But it taught me to be one with my chair through play. It taught me to be proficient in my mobility tool without thinking about it. Get out on a court, hit a ball, push around. And it really taught me to be very, very a very proficient wheelchair user, and to also be competitive. And I think those two things have really translated in my life for me to be,
I think so
reaching the goals that I am.
100%. One of the things, I did my homework on you. The viewers don't know. I did my full. There's so much. I just couldn't get enough. There's so much that she's done, and I just was taking it all in and doing my homework, and I really wanted to do a good job. one of the things that I heard you say in another podcast was your dad, he would say to your grandma, like, don't pick her up. She has to do it on her. She has to learn to do it on her own.
Yeah.
And he would say to you, you can, you should, and you will in this life. You need to adapt and power through because people are watching.
Wow, you have done your homework.
I mean, I still get chills. And I'm curious about, like, with your grandma, was there a lot of teaching others to, like, you guys need to sit back and let her do it? And did your dad have a hard time letting you fail, like, and pick yourself, like, the whole, fail forward kind of thing?
He was doing that because my mom passed away when I was 7 from leukemia. And before she passed away, it was kind of like her wish to him, please make sure that you teach her the skills that she needs to be an independent, strong woman. So when we're gone, that she's going to be able to take care of herself by herself. And he took that very seriously. And that translated in, don't pick her up, Granny. Let her figure this out. She's navigating a world where accessibility is not, ADA was not around when I was a kid. So, accessibility and having access to infrastructure and education and activities like that was also a lot of no's. And so he instilled in me that I have to find a way to get the glass from the top counter or the top shelf in the kitchen. You need to find a way to go play kickball with the rest of the kids. You need to find a way to be included so you can have as much in this life as everybody else, and that you can, take care of yourself. So that definitely translated to, like, Granny, don't touch her.
Did it bother you that he would push you to do these things? Like,
it was just embedded in me from such a young age that it was just like, Regina, you go and get a glass of water, and Alicia's going to do the same thing. It was never like we were never treated differently, so I didn't look at it that way at all. Yeah, and I think my twin sister has been, like, one of the most strategic allies that I've had in my life, because when we were little, when I was trying to navigate that stuff, I'd never felt like I was alone. I knew she was always there and always had my back, and she would pick up the little pieces and help me along. And I would do the same thing for her in other ways. So not having to navigate inaccessibility and exclusion and, frankly, segregation alone was a huge help in just feeling brave enough to try, because I wasn't alone. I always had her with me.
In high school, you talked about your first experience with some depression. What was it about those high school years that triggered that for you?
I think part of it was the disability. Part of it was going through typical adolescence anyways. I think the two things coupled together are pretty tough. High school was the time where it was my first realization that I'm disabled. I never had that, like, connection with being disabled or not. It was just me. And then I got to high school, and really middle school, high school, and I didn't go to prom, and I didn't have the boyfriends, and there was the comparison. I would see my sister doing those things, and it was really hard. I mean, that was really hard, and I definitely had some depression with that. But I think that also comes along with adolescence. So I think
100%.
It was kind of the two things mixed together. Yeah. During high school, I was also going through a ton of major surgeries and a lot of medical stuff that was really hard to, I guess, wrap my brain around. At that point, I could really realize and understand that, oh, I'm different. I have to go through a lot of medical things to maintain this life. And,
that's a tough age regardless.
Yeah, so I was mad about it sometimes.
Yeah, I would think so.
Yeah.
Yeah. In terms of your professional life, you've accomplished so much. You have stated that you've always been doubted, and that you spend the first half of every job interview wishing away your disability and pitching the employer on how you can do the job in spite of or despite your disability before you even get to all the ways you're qualified. I am jumping ahead slightly with this, and I don't want to get too far ahead because I want to talk about the college years before we really diving into your career. But before we discuss college, talk to us about your very first job as a server, because this is good.
My very first job, entering college when I was leaving high school, right out of high school into college, I was a waitress in a wheelchair. My sister was doing the job. She was always kind of like, we would always do the same thing, same friends, same job, same activities, same everything. So she started working at this Mexican restaurant and she started waiting on tables. And I was like, oh, I want to do that too. And so she advocated for me to get in there. And I started off as a hostess. And then as you know, the management got to know me a little bit, I said, can I try to do that? And it took a open-minded, forward-thinking company and leader to pick the girl in the wheelchair to put 15 margaritas on her lap and go around the tables. But
That's amazing.
it was, and I didn't look at it as anything but a job where I was making tips and putting myself through college at that point. But buzz started buzzing around, and there was a ton of stories written on it. It went around the world. It was my
I saw that cover or the article. Yeah.
Yeah, and it was my viral moment where like articles from China all the way around the world, just waitress in a wheelchair. And that happened because people want to see things that they don't believe in. You know, people want to experience things that they're told not to. And society tells us that disabled people can't do a lot of things. And so every time I had an opportunity to choose to go into work, I had an amazing opportunity to share with the public what is possible, that people with disabilities can literally do anything. We just have to be willing to collaborate on adaptations. We need to be willing to implement accessibility, and we need to be willing to believe in the human experience of everyone, not just the typical able-bodied perfection.
Yeah. Yes, 100. I don't think I quite got it. Like I felt like I got it because obviously I've had my own disabilities and stuff, but it really wasn't until really doing the deep dive on your story. And I really hope we do. I told you, I'm like, I just really want to do this justice because I want everyone to get it the same way I did. I don't think I really got it, what your message is, and in a way that made so much sense to me. Like, absolutely, why didn't we think of this sooner, kind of thing? Because I don't want to get too far ahead of myself, but I just feel like there is, and I was talking to my husband about this too, there is an entirely different new skill set that someone can bring that I don't think people are aware of, that are either going through a disability, have gone through a disability, because they have to learn to navigate the world differently. And that takes foresight. That takes a lot of awareness. There's just it's a different skill set. And I feel like until there's a lot of people, until they're in those shoes, they may not ever learn those skills. So it's a strength.
It totally is a strength. And I'm really excited about the work that I'm doing because it's taking disabled people and it's highlighting their strengths and their skill set, that we have to be really, really, really good, if not the best, at something to be chosen. You know, you're not going to just pick the girl in the wheelchair to do X activity if there's somebody else in front of you that is standing on their feet and they look perfectly able-bodied, and we've got all these biases in front of us going, they're a better choice. But what we need to understand as a society is that people with disabilities are overcoming every second of the day, whether it's, you know, how am I going to get a glass down from a cupboard, or, you know, do a task at work. And so leveraging our differences like that as valuable attributes that we can leverage in the workplace and in life is a new lens to be looking at these things. And instead of this like typical traditional limitation that we place on people with disabilities. And so we're just trying to overcome that stigma.
Yeah, no, I get it. Just on as a side note, working as a server, is that when you, I mean, I think, did I hear or did I read or watch that you learned that was your first introduction to like sales? And like how to like,
wow, you really have done your homework. Oh my gosh.
Girl, you go. I had to cut myself off eventually. I'm like, I really need to write this outline now. I can't keep watching. But yeah, like you were saying, like, you know, you were making crazy amounts of tips because you realized like how to sell, you know, being a server. And then
I would get $100 tips on $20 bill. I
Yeah.
mean, like waitressing in a
And
wheelchair
I
was good
believe
for
it.
college.
And I believe it because I feel like you, and I told you this from the moment we met in person because we met online first, but you have this something, you know, where you connect with people. And not everybody has that, you
Thank
know,
you.
and it is, yeah, it's pretty spectacular. Was there any experiences working as a server that did it open up opportunities to have conversations that maybe you wouldn't have had prior?
Oh, yeah. And first of all, it taught me to start to have the uncomfortable conversations when I wasn't ready, to be honest with you, because I would roll up to tables and it would be like, Mommy, why is our waitress kneeling?
gosh.
Or what's wrong with her? But it would open up conversations, which would bridge so much understanding. And for the most part, it was super, super positive. I can only remember a couple times. There was one time where a family refused to have me serve them because they thought that it was dirty. Like they thought it would be dirty for me to be waiting on them because of my wheels and things like that.
Mm.
I don't touch my wheels with my
Mhm.
hand, like, but
Mhm.
so that was a thing. And honestly, that was an assumption and an
Yeah.
unknown.
Mhm.
Um, which is placed on disabled people a lot. It's like, oh, I assume that you're touching your wheel with your hands, or I assume that you're not able to do this properly, or I assume that you're not going to survive,
Mhm.
you
Mhm.
know?
Yeah.
And that literally dictates a, a path
Yeah.
forward or not, you know?
Yeah.
So it was definitely an opportunity to educate, and it was an opportunity to also practice. It was my first opportunity to practice inclusion in the workplace. It took a ton of work on both of our parts. It took a lot of work on my employer's part to make sure the environment was accessible, to make sure I had what I needed, to move the things that I couldn't reach into areas that I could. And it also took my willingness to try to put on a smile and go in and face the things that I definitely would face that were uncomfortable sometimes.
Yeah.
But it was a beautiful experience, and like it was my viral moment. It literally went around the world, and that was because, like I said, like we need to believe in things that we don't, and
Right.
whether that's about disability or not.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it was awesome.
100%. There's so much more. We're going to go kind of circle back to that, but um after high school, you chose to move away from home for college. You went to Chico State, where you earned your bachelor's degree in kinesiology, adapted PE, and then moved to Belgium for 2 years to earn your master's in adaptive physical activity. So here's the thing. I am someone who is a very nervous traveler, and it's not a secret. I don't even like to drive. I do drive, don't enjoy it at all. I know a lot of my stuff stems from my personality. But I having my own issues with my health doesn't help with my confidence. So when you shared your experience, my knee-jerk reaction during the pre-interview was to ask you about fear, because I would have fear. Can you walk us through that decision about moving out of the country, how you felt about it, why you chose Europe? I know you got off to a little bit of a rocky start, but it just feels very bold, especially at such a young age. But was fear even an issue for you?
It was bold. You know, when I went to college, it was my first time. My twin and I went our separate ways.
Yeah.
It was the first time, and that started in Chico for my bachelor's degree, but it was the first time where I went off and we both decided that we're going to go to different colleges, we're going to make our own friends, we're going to be independent for a little while and just be Alycia or Regina. And so that's what I did. And when I went to Chico State, I studied adapted physical activity because that was something that empowered me and I thought I could give back. And there was a scholarship program that I applied for to go do a master's. And I did that because I applied.
Yeah.
Because my dream was to work for the International Paralympic Committee. I wanted to study elite sports and do the science piece of it. And there was a small little piece of this. It was a European master's degree. It was 35 people around the world, one per country. I got chosen for the United States for my class during that time. And there was a small piece. It was like the Paralympics was tied into it. And I was
Okay.
like, okay, I'm going over there. I don't know how far I'll make it in this program, but my goal is to rub elbows with the right people and make the connections. And
Would you have been like 21 at that time ish, or?
I was more like 20. I was a late bloomer in college. I was more like 26.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
I went to junior college in Lake Tahoe, and the whole college thing was a
Oh,
little bit
okay. Yeah.
later. So I was around 26-ish,
Yeah.
27, something like that. And anyways, I moved over there, and it was scary.
Yeah.
It was really scary.
I would think also being apart from Regina would be part of the
that
issue.
And there was a lot of things that I had to navigate. Like, from Europe is very inaccessible, so I had a lot of like reality checks with my privilege in the United States over anywhere else in the world.
okay.
To be honest with you, it was
Yeah.
very
Wow.
inaccessible, and the mindset over there is different. It's like there were signs of wheelchairs on buildings that made you feel like it would be accessible.
Mhm.
So I would go in and say, "Can I use your restroom?" Like, I'm out and about, and there's be like maybe one place in the entire city that I could actually use a restroom because it was so inaccessible. And one moment I had a business had said, "No, we're not accessible. That means you're allowed to enter the building." So there was a mindset of, we allow disabled people in. So it was wild. It was totally wild. Yeah, so you're even having trouble. Like,
I can't.
I couldn't either. It was so. But I also realized, living in an inaccessible place like that the general public was more aware. Like, strangers would help me on trains that weren't accessible without me even asking.
Okay.
And I think here in the United States, because things are more accessible and we're kind of like very focused on what we're doing in our own space, we don't see a lot of the struggles of others. And when I lived over there, it showed me that it's okay to accept help from others, that inclusion, again, is collaborative, and sometimes you have to ask for things to make it happen. So living in Europe was absolutely, I mean, it was an adventure, but it was one of the best things I ever did in my entire life.
I imagine that being able to do that on your own for a couple of years gave you a lot of I would imagine it would give me a lot of confidence if I could do something like that.
It did. And when I went over there, I accomplished my dreams. Like, the program took us to the International Paralympic Committee headquarters in Bonn, Germany. They brought the entire class. Like, we did a whole tour, and afterwards, the executive team for the International Paralympic Committee was sitting around a table, and as everybody was walking out, I was the only person with a disability in our program. Everybody was walking out. I was like, this is my shot. And so I went up and I introduced myself to every executive at the International Paralympic Committee and said, "I'm Alycia, we're going to be working together." I shook their hand. "I'm Alycia, we're going to be working together." I shook their hand. I shook the right person's hand, and I ended up working and interning on the educational committee for the International Paralympic Committee. We wrote and developed educational manuals that were distributed globally to children in schools around the world. And I got to do research at the Paralympic Games and all kinds of really amazing things.
Amazing.
So, it was checking off a bucket list for me.
100%. Gosh, that's so cool.
Yeah, it was cool.
Okay. Did you ever have, and you don't have to answer this if you want to, but did you ever have issues with body image when you were young? Like, just in general?
I mean, yes. Even today. I mean, when does that go away? I don't even know.
Yeah, I don't think it, I don't know. I mean, I hope it does.
Body image is just like, I think for any of us, especially as women, can be tough.
Yeah.
And then as a disabled woman, it's been probably one of the biggest insecurities that I've had in my entire life. It's been the thing that I'm always trying to, accommodate for. And I just have a lot of insecurities. I've never felt super beautiful
which
from
is
like
so
a physical standpoint.
You do not seem even the slightest bit insecure.
I'm very insecure.
I would never get that from you. You seem extremely that's kind of why I asked, because I'm like, she has figured out a way to hack this. Like, all the things, you know, that we are obsessed over ridiculously, like you have figured out a way to focus on the shit that matters. You know what I mean? But I don't think any of us are exempt. And I mean, obviously, like, I think we're all human, but I just wonder, like, does that play a role in, is it ever something that is, I mean, I think for a lot of women, it's top of mind. And I've had to actively, like, tell myself, like, it's actually not important, you know? Like, how for you, has that been a hard road, or do you think that it's so equal with everything else that you've had to overcome?
No, I mean, I think my body image translates to my insecurities with it translates to intimacy and dating. And if I feel confident to go down that path, or I mean, I'm married now, but like all of that was super uncomfortable
Yeah.
most of my life. Um, Body image, even like going on job interviews and what are they thinking about how I'm sitting in my chair and do I look okay? And am I like, I'm constantly thinking about how my body looks because I know it's not, I'm air quoting typical. Like it's just not. My body isn't even typical to like able or disabled people that have had spinal cord injury and they've got more of a typical able body. I sometimes look at spinal cord injury and I'm like, I wish I had your body, because
I would have even known that.
Yeah. Well, so that is, I mean, that's how granular I get with this is like, because my disability is congenital. So there's just things that are not
the
great.
arms. I got to know, is this genetic or is this really from pushing the chair? Like,
I mean, I work out.
Yeah.
So
you are, it's one of the first things I noticed about you.
Thank you.
Your guns. It's really impressive.
It's a little bit of working out and a little bit of genetic, probably.
Yeah. It's really cool. So. I told my trainer about it.
Oh, I love it.
She's a competitor, so I was like, you got to see this girl I'm going to be interviewing. Okay, so so after college, you went on to work in sales primarily, where you became a top salesperson in your field. Later, you became the vice president of sales for an award-winning technology company, which is spectacular. And I would imagine that road to success was a little different from most who go on to become a VP of a company. And I know you guys run your own company now, but prior to that, what did it take for you to move up the corporate ladder in terms of like interviewing for jobs? Was there any discrimination in the workplace that you had to go through?
Yes, I'm sure. Like, I don't know how like fully apparent it was. I know for me getting the jobs that I received, I used my twin sister as a strategic tool almost every time until I got much later in my career and I had some confidence. But we went from the waitressing, then she started in corporate sales. I followed her, get her in. And so I did that for a couple companies and learned my craft and made my way up the ladder. And I don't know how that would have been without her, to be honest with you. I was so insecure to go into a job interview. I used to hide my wheelchair from hiring managers. I would not show it on LinkedIn. It was not something that I would make public until I was literally rolling in the door because I always went for the physical jobs, the waitress, the salesperson, the traveling, and all these things where people are like, you're not going to be able to do this. And so I wouldn't say until I arrived there, and then always having to be prepared to wish away my disability, say how I can do the job, then get to my experience, then get to the job interview, and then hopefully after getting through all of that, that I might be a candidate. And so it was a lot. And I had HR teams. One of my very first sales jobs, I had the HR department pull me in the office and ask me why I'm the only one on the team asking for help. And this was like carrying 6-foot boxes. I used to call my husband, like, I don't think I could do this. Can you come help me set this up? I used to sell coffee programs. They won't know you're here. I need help. Because I never wanted to say I couldn't do anything. So it was just like really difficult, honestly. But over time, I got really good at what I was doing. And I'm a people person. So I'm really good at sales. I'm really good at networking. I'm really good at negotiation, relationship building, and all that stuff. And I got into technology sales and was working for startups. And the last company that I was hired for before I started my business was a startup technology company. And my boss did not know I was going to show up in a wheelchair. And he hired me. And then I started speaking a lot on disability inclusion. He's the first boss that didn't flinch, like, oh, like, he didn't know. He walked in. We met at Starbucks. It was my first interview. No clue. Um,
When someone flinches, like, because you've done a lot of, you have a big resume. You have there's a lot there. And when have encountered people that have flinched, how do you react to that?
I actually
do you react?
The thing that it stands out to me is when they don't flinch, because usually they do. So that flinch is typical.
That's the normal. Oh, interesting.
It's totally typical. And that's not to say that that's good at all. That's bad. And that's why I'm doing the work that I'm doing. But yeah, that flinch is typical. Mm-hmm. Very. Mm-hmm. Like, I would go into corporate sales meetings with top leaders, presidents of companies. They would not know I was rolling in, and I would get there, and there's just always a moment of, oh, and then I have to make sure everybody feels okay and that we're good, and then get to the job. There's just a lot of extra work that we're requiring of people with disabilities to do in the workplace, because we have this bias towards them. So
yeah. I'm just thinking about some of the stuff that I remember you said in another interview where you really, we'll get to that. It's so interesting. You asked, I don't know if this is the boss you're talking about, the one that didn't flinch. You asked him, why did you hire me?
Yep. That's
and
him.
He said, because I knew you must be a good planner.
Yep.
What did he mean by that?
So he saw my disability as an asset and an attribute to lift up and to use strategically, honestly. And that meant that he knows that for me to do the same job as anyone else, I need to be very proficient in so many steps before to get to that job. I need to plan and pre-plan and plan some more, whether it's accessibility or travel or whatever it is, to just do the same thing as someone else. And that proficiency around planning, he knew would translate to my work. And he not only saw beyond my disability, but he knew it was core to the qualities that made me uniquely qualified over someone else. Mm-hmm. And this was one of the, if not the most important moment of my entire career. Nobody had ever said anything like that to me. And he didn't even realize that he was giving me a moment there. When he said that to me, he had no clue. He was just, it was just normal conversation.
Yeah.
And I rolled away from that meeting going, there's my platform. Yeah. That is my platform.
Yeah, because it really is about what I remember you saying about this was like you have to think about like transportation, timing, if you're taking materials with you, how you're going to get them, transport, like how there's so much that you have to plan for in advance that maybe the average person would just take for granted. And that's a skill. And if you take that into every area of your work, yeah,
I literally have to like call, plan, and plan everything. And it's not just like but it's also while I'm on trips, and what do I need medically? Like, what do I need to take care of myself while I'm away? Mm-hmm. Do I need to worry about a flat tire? What do I need to, like, there's so many.
Think about that.
No, there's so many little things.
Because you travel alone as well.
I do.
You don't always, which you're braver than I am because I hate traveling alone. And so it's all you. It's up to you to figure out. And
Well, I travel with my husband a lot now, but back
with
in
your
those
guys'
days,
company,
back in those days, it was just me and, even just like Ubers and like those types of services are very judgmental on disability too. I've had Ubers. I've ordered an Uber. They see me and they'll drive right by. They don't want to pick me up and deal with the wheelchair. Like, that has happened multiple times.
And you know what you're doing, so you would know how to tell them.
Yeah, I have the worst Uber anxiety. So
I bet
companies like that are not, like regulated, really put the disabled and inclusion experience. It's very up and down, and I actually hate it. It's one of the things I hate.
Oh my goodness. Gosh, so much that we don't even think about. But oh my gosh. Yeah, I don't like Uber either.
Anyways, but travel's part of it. So.
Yes. Okay. And then I actually worked on the quote that things we have to overcome are assets that often make us overqualified, which I thought was super interesting. something that you said in one of your other interviews. In terms of your health today, you mentioned to me that the hardest parts of your disability are oftentimes the parts that are not visible, which I thought was interesting just as someone who has an invisible illness. Do you ever struggle with the fact that so much of what you deal with is invisible and isn't something that the public would know to consider? Like for me, it's like sometimes frustrating that people can't see my issues. Is that an issue for you?
Yes.
Or no? Yeah.
And I'm really grateful actually now today that the non-apparent, invisible, chronic illness conversation is really coming to the forefront of disability advocacy, because that is the part of my disability that is, I mean, don't get me wrong, it's hard to navigate a chair and figure out infrastructure and all of that, but like for me, like I have a reconstructed bladder, lots of kidney stuff, like there's things that I have to deal with and maintain. And I was always the employee that was taking an extra 5 minutes in the bathroom or taking a little longer doing something else or out with a kidney infection. And all of that was stuff was really embarrassing for me. And now we're kind of creating the conversation to be a little safer I mean, I would have never, the fact that I just said that out loud, I would have never
Oh my gosh.
said that. Like I use catheters to go to the bathroom, to go urinate. And
people are talking
I used to
about
lie
it.
about it.
Really?
Other spinal cord injuries, friends would be like, "Do you use catheters?" I'd be like, "Oh no, not me. Nope." Mm-mm.
There's
no.
so much in the chronic illness, especially the invisible illness community. They have my eyes have been opened a lot to like this conversation is happening. You're right. It is something that people are talking about more and more and normalizing talking about it so people don't feel like they have to like hide it or whatever. And that is, I think, up to everybody's discretion on what they're comfortable with. I mean, there are things I don't want to talk about
100%.
either. I think I mentioned in one of the interviews I did for myself on my own story that there was a period of time where when I was not paralyzed, that's a strong word, but couldn't walk, and I lost the use of I couldn't grip and I couldn't move so I lost all like strength. I had very, very, very bad limb weakness. And so going to the bathroom for me and like toilet paper, like the whole like grabbing and gripping and tearing, like I was like, oh, I'm really going to lose this. I'm really going to lose this ability. And I remember that was like a big, and I remember telling a friend one time, and then I was thinking, oh, well, like that time of the month, and I'm going to have to worry about some. There was so much that at that point in time, I was like, oh, this is the direction it's going. And I didn't want to tell a soul.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I was so embarrassed. The one person I did tell, it was like, she didn't know how to react. It was a whole thing. But people are talking about it more now.
I'm so grateful because it's empowering me in my own space we are who we are, and disability is part of our identity. And I've been doing so much work my entire life to try to be someone else.
Yeah. Yeah.
Until my 40s. And I'm like, you know what? I'm done with that. Like, I'm really just really going to try to be who I am in the way that I am.
Yeah.
And so that type of advocacy that's happening right now is really, really important. And it's showing our society and proving that disability is actually our common ground. It's not the thing that separates us. A lot of us, 1 in 4 of us, and that's only the ones that are raising their hand and going, "Oh, that's." So there's, the statistic largest minority group is the disabled population, and it's the one where we're
crosses all the barriers.
It does.
It crosses all the.
It crosses all the lines of the diversity conversation, but it's the one that's left out most of the time because there's so much fear around talking about it.
Oh, interesting.
So much fear.
Yeah. Gosh. And it's, and 1 in 4, is it 1 in 4? Is it 1 in 4 at some point or 1 in 4?
It's 1 in 4 of us at some point.
Are going to have, wow.
And it's over 1 billion people globally. Like it's a massive amount of people.
Yeah.
But it isn't just the girl in the wheelchair. It's 80% of disability is non-apparent, invisible.
Yeah, and that's where it gets like really tricky. Like you and I talked about the whole handicap placard thing.
Yeah.
For me, like I'm always so afraid to use mine. Like I'll be going to Target and I know how bad my legs can be sometimes. And so coming out sometimes is the hardest part because then by then they're weak and I'm like, I don't want to push the cart and go all the way, whatever. But I've been called out by people before, and so you get afraid because if it's invisible, then you must be fine, I guess. People think it's so frustrating.
That goes to that whole society is placing assumptions and unknowns on someone else. We do not know what somebody else is going through unless we're willing to engage with them, and it's not our place to assume anything at all. And I think from a non-apparent standpoint, that's a tough like lens to be seen through.
Yeah.
And so,
Yeah.
but I think the advocacy is really starting.
I think so too. And it's a good thing. I'm glad
It
we're
is
doing this
good.
episode. After you started your company, so you resigned from your corporate position, and together with your husband, Marty, the two of you run the Alycia Anderson Company. You are a nationwide professional public speaker with a very long resume, as I've said, that includes your 2021 TEDx talk. This position's giving, or has you traveling a lot. You're like, we've already talked about this. You're in airports and navigating flights and airplanes, TSA. There's a whole process. In terms of everything that you have to go through, do you ever think to yourself, this is too much, I can't keep doing this, there must be an easier way, I should, like, do you ever think I should just go back to what I did before? Do you ever reach your breaking point, in other words?
I feel so privileged to be doing what I am doing today is what I have been dreaming of my entire life. So the fact that I was brave enough to take the leap and leave a job that I loved, honestly, I could have retired in, to start this business, I'm very proud of myself for doing, and we're having a lot of success. There's no looking back for me. Do I get entrepreneurship exhaustion? 100%. And so in my mind, do I go, was it easier? But no, every stage that I'm on, the impact is so apparent.
I bet.
That I leave these events going, oh my God, like we really, really helped the guy that raised his hand in tears to talk about him just being diagnosed with MS, or the mother that raised her hand, or there's just so much engagement, and people want to have the permission to talk about disability in a safe place and not be afraid. And so, my platform's called Heart of Inclusion, and it really is about the human experience of disability, not just the compliance piece. We've got the ramp, move on, but like, what's the human value as well? And so I'm honored and privileged to be doing what I'm doing, and I'm going to do it as long as I'm received.
Yeah, as long as there's it is interesting how it is. I mean, we're all, on different paths doing something different, yet somewhat similar. But I've never worked harder on anything than I have this. I mean, not for as long as I have this podcast, it's almost been a year. And it is so hard. And I ask myself all the time, like, why am I doing this? Like, this is so hard. I don't need to be doing this. Why am I doing this? But what it comes down to is the amount of the fulfillment, how gratifying it feels to be putting something out in the world that is so satisfying. It's just so satisfying knowing that you're making a difference, or at least I'm trying, but I think that's what keeps you going. As somebody in a position where it is so hard, and it's nothing really quite compares to that feeling. I always talk to my daughter about this, like, overcoming adversity, I think, is the number one thing that leads to confidence, that leads to joy. It's the knowing that you can, and you did, and you have, and you are doing it. And I feel like, as hard as it is, it's like you almost become addicted to, like, I like the fact that you are doing something very important, and that feeling. And I mean, that has to feel amazing.
It does. And I totally agree with you. And I talk about this on stages, is that overcoming adversity, even when you think that there's too much in front of you to try, you do it anyways, or I do it anyways, because on the other side of that is dream come true, like bucket list, life-changing opportunities. Adversity is achieving, if you're able to, and you don't even have to overcome it, just trying.
Just trying.
Having the bravery to try is really the thing.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, like the TED Talk, for example, like that's, people don't think of it as a big deal, but that's like a pretty big deal to have to go up on stage to memorize something without a teleprompter, without, you did it. And that one thing was a huge game changer. And I think it is for a lot of people. And I could have easily been like, oh, no, no, no. Like, but yeah. Okay, so you have said that you've been an experiment of inclusion since that cell split into two in utero. I wrote that down. In 1990, the American Disabilities Act was implemented. You were a sophomore in high school at the time. Prior to this being implemented, I heard you say in a different interview that there was no guarantee you'd have access to public restrooms so you can get into buildings, just like the basic human rights. And you also mentioned, which I thought this is super interesting, that the ADA, it doesn't just cover people who are born disabled, but also disabilities that arise as we age, get sick, get injured. Basically, what you're saying is anyone could be affected or become disabled at any time. And the ADA is in place to protect us so we can maintain a quality of life, which I think it's an important point to point out. Can you expand on that a little bit about like what you mean by that? Because I don't think people ever plan to become disabled.
Yeah. Disability is part of our human experience. Our bodies change as we age, and disability can be temporary, a broken leg, a broken arm. It could be permanent, somebody like me. It could be aging, illness, onset, chronic illness as we age.
Mm-hmm.
And there's the list that falls under the disability umbrella is massive. It is absolutely huge.
Yeah.
So number one, it isn't just a them problem. It is an us piece of humanity.
Yeah.
Like it's part of life.
Yeah.
And from an ADA standpoint, ADA is one of the most comprehensive pieces of civil rights legislation that has ever been implemented in our country. It's the same, it's right up there with the civil rights movement, with women's suffrage. Like it gives us the freedoms to navigate our life as our bodies change, so we can go to work, so we can get an education, so we can enter buildings, so we can live and be a part of society.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a beautiful opportunity for all of us to live our lives as we change.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, that type of legislation, specifically in the workplace or in our society, it's salted with adversity. It's looked at as punitive. It's feared. And we put human beings under that umbrella as well. So I go into work and I apply. They're looking at me like, can she do this? Is she a hazard? Do we have the right accessibility? Will she sue me? All of these things that are, it's not a nice way to like put disabled people under,
Right.
when you're trying to navigate life. These are beautiful opportunities, this legislation, to live our lives.
Yeah.
Otherwise, we're at home.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we don't have a life.
Yeah. And I feel like some could get criticized for that, or some would criticize that, and that's gets into a whole nother topic of ableism, but it's like, yeah. So it's like you can't win. So we have to do something. So we have to make a change so we can all win.
We just need to understand that disability inclusion advocacy and legislation and expanding those things, like an example of that is website accessibility is now the law under ADA.
Mm-hmm.
And organizations look at this like, another thing.
Tell me what is this? What is website accessibility?
Website accessibility is so if somebody with a disability, meaning an example would be somebody with a visual impairment or somebody who has audio impairments, hearing impairments, that their website is accessible to give them captions or have read back, or maybe there's something visually that they need to, and
this is now
within the last couple of years, this has just been passed. And this is an example of things that companies are required to maintain now and implement, but it's put under this, another thing that we have to do.
I don't think people I think people judge things they don't understand.
Yeah.
And I think that's the purpose for it. Like my podcast, your podcast, because the more people start to understand these things, like why we're doing these things, and it's like, oh, okay, I get it now, and no big deal. Because it doesn't have to be the big deal, that I think people...
It not only doesn't have to be a big deal, but if we look at it as an opportunity to innovate, meaning there are so many tools that we are using today that were developed specifically for accessibility. Closed captions, Siri, audiobooks, electric toothbrushes, curb cutouts, elevate, you name it, we're all using them.
Yes.
And if businesses start to look at accessibility as an opportunity to innovate, when you're looking at a piece of software or a piece of infrastructure and you think of the 1 in 4, the over 1 billion people, and you're creating a path of least resistance to use your technology, use your services, use your business, access your infrastructure, your homes, whatever, you're gaining, there's return on investment.
Totally get it. Yeah.
And so it's a shift in lens.
It's a shift in, yeah.
It's actually an opportunity. I think it's 83% of people that use closed caption do not have a disability. So
I know this to be, well, I didn't know the statistic, but I know most people I know use closed captions.
Yeah. So accessibility is something that's required by law. And frankly, ADA is the basics. It is bare bones. It's a starting point, but we need to be looking further out at like, how do we make this barrier free? How is it universally accessible for everybody?
Yeah.
And then you start to reap the benefits of more customers and everybody using these tools. And so this is a modern, like what I like to say, a modern pathway to inclusion, accessibility, and a shift in mindset of this is an opportunity. We wouldn't launch a website without doing spell check. We also shouldn't launch a website without it being accessible, because if you launch a website without it being accessible, you are saying disabled people are not allowed to buy my products. You wouldn't do that in a building. You wouldn't say, oh, stop, you're blind, you're not allowed in. So it's, anyways, but it's required by law now.
This is interesting, and I think again it comes back to, I don't think people, I think that we're all ignorant to some of this stuff, and myself included, because when I would see, I know there's a term for it, but in a caption where you have the description of the image. Yep. I never knew what that was for a longest time. Yep. I was like, why are people doing that? I admit, I really didn't know. And I finally Googled it. Yeah. So I'm like, why are they doing that? And then now it's something that I'm like, I got to remember to implement that. But I think some of these things are things that people don't even know about because nobody's really talking about. People are just, checking a box or not.
Totally.
Okay. So your platform, as you said, is called The Heart of Inclusion, and your message is to teach inclusion as something that should be viewed as a collaboration. I love that. Like, it's a collaborative effort where instead of assuming there are limitations, we ask ourselves what unique skills can people with disabilities contribute to the workplace and to their communities. Some of the quotes, again, that I wrote down are that, quote, we need to shift our lens on how we view disabled individuals and notice the tremendous value that exists and see the possibilities first instead of the limitations. And one example that I heard you talk about was how most disabled individuals are natural problem solvers, which that really hit home. Can you think of an example of where, even in your own life or something you've heard about, where that would apply as someone who is a natural problem solver who happens to be disabled? I'm sorry, I'm totally putting you on the spot.
Let me think about it.
I can tell you something that you said.
Okay, tell me. I'm sure you can.
Well, I mean,
love it.
You have to navigate.
You're teaching me to be a better podcast host. I'm taking notes here today.
I will forget my questions if I don't. But like when you go to, you have like an internal checklist when you go into like do a presentation or whatever, and all of the, it's almost. It's for somebody like you, I'm very much summarizing, but for somebody in your position, you have to be organized. Mm-hmm. Like you have to be, there's little room for error kind of thing. So the things that maybe the average person would forget, supplies or whatever, it's like you already have that covered because that's a natural part of your day-to-day life. I don't know if that's considered problem solving, but I think it goes back to what your boss said is like, or it was maybe it was just something that you said in relation to that was like you have to know how am I going where's the building, where I'm going to park, how am I going to get in the building, how am I going to get the supplies up there, how am I going to whatever, how am I going to communicate this to things that the average person doesn't think about. And that I don't know if that's considered problem solving, like I said, but it is considered thinking like 2-3 steps ahead.
Totally. And it's that proficiency around planning for sure. I would say that's one of my superpowers from my disability. And it's just kind of a requirement. People with disabilities need to be first or we're last. You know, we're not, there's no real in the middle area for us. So, I think it's the proficiency, the planning, and that kind of has driven my competitiveness and my want to win, achieve. What other goals am I going to be able to accomplish? I think has been a driver as well.
Has it ever been a feeling like you have to prove something to anybody, or is it mostly about yourself, or like, because it doesn't really sound like anybody ever said like you'll never amount to, like you didn't really get that from the public or childhood that you were doubted, but maybe it was unsaid.
Most of the doubts were, like you just said, they were not necessarily said, but they were actions, right? Like I had a teacher in high school. I went to a high school that was 2 stories, and his classroom was upstairs. It was a history course, and there was no elevator at that time in the school, and he refused to move his classroom downstairs. And so I sat in the library for a whole semester and did not get to like be in class with the rest of the kids. Or when we're out at PE and they're running the mile, and my favorite exercise is pushing my wheelchair up steep hills for my cardio. That's what I do. Mm-hmm. I sat on the sidelines. So when we're excusing people with disabilities out, we're not giving them the accommodations to be integrated and to be a part of society. It's telling us, you don't belong. I have doubt you can't do this. You're safer on the sidelines, you know, and those things translate into internalized ableism, meaning you start telling yourself, I can't do that. I don't belong there. I'm not going to go there. I'm going to stay home. That's not possible. There's too many obstacles in front of me right now. Because over time, society tells you these things. Mm-hmm. There's not an access for me to get in. There's no bathroom there that I'm going to be able to. I mean, the lists go on and on. Like, inclusion of disability isn't just infrastructure. It's societal. It's in relationships. It's love. It's hiring. It's employment. Like, there's so many layers of having to overcome and find a path forward to be included. It's literally everywhere. Yeah. Like, it never, ever ends.
Yeah.
So it's not really what people say. It's what they don't say. And that's in my platform. I really try to bridge that gap of we need to stop looking past or staring from afar and not engaging and not having dialogue. We need to start to have dialogue around this, whether we make mistakes or not. Mm-hmm. And we're going to make mistakes. And I make mistakes all the time, for sure. But we got to get past not talking about disability. I mean, people are afraid to even say the word disability. We're at the basic stages, you know, because we teach our kids at a young age.
Yeah.
I was in the grocery store one time, and there was a mom and a son in line in front of me, and the son was grabbing candy and doing his thing in the aisle, and he turns around and looks at me and sees my wheelchair, and he points at me, and he's like, "Mom, I want that for Christmas." And she was like, "Shh!" She was so embarrassed. Oh. And we do that to our kids. We say, like, don't say those things. Don't look. Don't engage. You know. And we're teaching our kids from a very young age that disability is bad. That we don't. The kids in school, even today, like, are the playgrounds accessible? Are the kids actually being integrated? Sometimes they're not. We need to be doing a much better job still. And the more nonverbal communication that we're giving to youth and through life is it's saying disabled people do not belong here. And that's a big thing to overcome.
What would be a way for a mom, let's just say in that scenario, to handle that situation? Because I'm sure it happens.
So for me, like, I can't speak for all disabled people. For me, it's just more like teaching how to have respectful dialogue and letting them explore. I want children to come up to me and ask me, you know, what's up with your wheels? Why are your legs small? What, you know, and I've gotten all those questions.
From children?
Oh yeah. You know,
Yeah.
and they just they're curious.
yeah.
They want to learn. They're not even there in a place of judgment.
No,
they
that's
want
why I
to
think
learn,
it's-
and then you tell them, and then they move on.
Yeah.
And it's when we start to put fear in them that they've said something wrong. We start to second guess and go, ugh, I don't think I should engage. And then it brings this separation. So
Regina has a little girl, right?
she does.
Yeah. So I'm sure, like, have you had a lot of these conversations with her?
I mean,
You've been around since birth, obviously, so she's grown up with you.
yeah, I mean, she's a perfect example of the non-judgment. Like, she's seeing my disability now, and she'll mention that I am a wheelchair user or whatever, but it isn't like something that is, you know, like not equivalent to anyone
Gotcha.
else or anything like that. And on top of that, she will, you know, I've got a tennis wheelchair the one that Brad Parks made for me, actually. Like, she'll get in it, it's her size, and she'll roll around in it and pretend like she's me and act like she's on stage, and she'll want to mimic me, and she'll come up to me and say, oh, Auntie, your wheel is so beautiful. And, you know, those are the things that we need to encourage and keep, you know, I hope that innocence always remains. And I think the children in my life, they're growing up with me and my husband, but
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
This is a little bit. It's on topic, but off a bit. It makes me think about something about our conversation. Just brought this up to mind. My son has a lethal peanut allergy. He has got nut allergies across the board, but a lethal peanut allergy. We found that out the hard way. I mean, we almost like lost him, but when he was little. I don't know how it is now because he's now almost 22, so I have no idea what they're doing now. But in his school, what they were doing was and parents are really divided about this. So this is why I want to bring it up, because for the listeners, I want to get your take on it. Parents are really divided about this because what the schools often do is they have the allergy kids or the peanut allergic kids sit at a separate table, all of them together, and then so that way they don't have to like outlaw peanuts or whatever. And I never knew how I felt about that. Jordan was very, very educated about his allergies, so he knew what to do, what not to do, not to eat anybody's food. Like and I trusted him, and so I never had him segregated. But I guess my question is, what are your thoughts on that?
that sounds like segregation to me.
Do you think, because a lot of parents the schools that did say peanut-free school or peanut-free lunch or whatever, the parents were pissed that they couldn't send their kids to school with their peanut butter sandwich. And I'm like, I don't know how I would feel. I don't think I'd be pissed. I might be like, well, that sucks. That's his favorite sandwich. But, oh, well, he'll have it when he gets home from school, like, or whatever. I don't know. On the weekends, it's not that big of a deal. But I know that the peanut allergic kids hated it because their parents were fearful. And so they were like, oh, no, you can't go, you know, so they had to sit at the table. I just taught my son and trusted that he knew how to avoid peanuts. And so but the point is that the kids that were segregated to the peanut-free table hated it. And it was, you know, embarrassing for them.
That's segregation.
That's what I think too.
And
but
I think that the parents and the school could be offering some education
I think so too.
on that. I think there's an opportunity to bring in experts and like talk about how to do better, because that's not, I don't believe that that's the solution at all.
Mm-hmm.
I also believe that parents need to be taught what ableism is, and that is ableism right there.
I think so too.
And, you know, like,
Yes.
we all have a little touch of that in our lives, and we don't understand our biases towards disability.
Mm-hmm.
And they're significant,
Mm-hmm.
honestly. So I don't agree with that whatsoever. And I think you did the right thing. I think we need to, and this is for all kids with disabilities, in my opinion, parents need to trust them more. You know, parents need to give them the I guess the confidence to advocate for themselves, to understand how their body works, to trust them that when they're in another environment that you've taught them well enough to protect themselves, to know how to deal with something when it comes up, to understand who their allies are in an environment so they can go get them if they need them. And you segregating kids at a table is just like what they did to me or tried to do to me at a young age.
It's so
that is, I don't believe that's a solution at all.
It feels so what's the term? Old fashioned is not the term, but it feels like we have made no progress. Like, is there another way we could do this?
It just, a peanut butter sandwich sounds very superficial in comparison to a child's experience of feeling like they belong somewhere or do not. So that's a perfect example of teaching them that they don't belong.
I remember when he started kindergarten, I brought in like all of this literature for his kindergarten teacher to read. I'm like, you know, because had never even encountered a kindergarten student with, I'm like, really? Never? This was 2008 or something like that. And so it was the first time ever even learning about it. And I was like, this is really awful. Like, he cannot be the first kid. Anyways. Oh, that is a question that because parents are very divided about. People get heated about their peanut butter sandwiches. They want their kids to have them, and they don't want you to tell them that they can't send them. So I've always wondered, like, what is somebody who's not biased? Because I'm sure I am. What would they say about that?
I think that goes to like putting your feet in somebody else's shoes, or wheels, or frankly, somebody else's allergy. Like, how would you feel if your kid all of a sudden came down with the allergy? And they couldn't have their favorite peanut butter sandwich anymore, and they were being segregated. Like, that's terrible.
Exactly.
That's my opinion on that.
Oh, thank you for sharing. Okay, so your motto is to disable ableism. So how do you define ableism, and how do we as a society go about it? I'm sure we've in some ways answered this, but a lot of people will never even heard of that term. So how do we define that?
It's a discrimination or a social prejudice against people with disabilities based on the belief that typical abilities are superior. I like to say that it's the thief in the night of inclusion for people with disabilities. It blocks a pathway to inclusion. Like, to simplify ableism, it's when we look at somebody with a disability as if they need to be fixed to be whole, or we look at somebody with a disability, we define them solely by their disability, the wheelchair, and we miss the human being altogether. It's literally like the no ways, absolutely not, do not include, do not adapt, do not invite, do not befriend, do not love, do not hire, do not, all of it. And it's the fear and the pity in which we see people living with disabilities through, and it's the judgments that we place on what our abilities are. And it's ingrained in our society. It is literally ingrained in what we are taught about disability from such a young age. I didn't even know what it was for most of my life. I really didn't know what it was. And then I learned it, and I wrote a TEDx talk on it, and I was like, I cannot be associated to this word. It's devaluing my abilities that I've been working so hard on. Like, what is this word? So, but
that's kind of the hard part.
Oh, yeah, it is. And I've had to have a reckoning with my own ableism too. I mean, it's significant, So I'm just trying to educate companies, organizations, like when I'm on the stage, about what it is. And the whole disabling ableism is a play on words that actually my husband and I came up with when I was writing the TEDx talk, because we were both working in technology, and we thought flipping the switch off, like unplugging it, like disabling our ableism in our thoughts, in our words, in our actions, in our beliefs towards other people, so we can see like what a more modern pathway to inclusion is, which is like eliminating ableism and understanding that we all have unique.
There's an opportunity for collaboration.
Totally.
Which is, I think, that one word that collaboration, that as a term, and to describe what it is that we need to be doing. I love it.
And we need to be adaptable, you know, like we're so
Yes.
this way needs to be this way, like the peanut butter sandwiches. They have to bring peanut butter. No, like how do we adapt so everyone can have space?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, adapt and grow should be like a way of the world. Like, and like something else that just came to mind was a lot of, this is a silly example, but a lot of people did really, really well during COVID working from home, and they actually were more productive, and they got more done, and they were better employees across the board. But we've always had our staff come in the office. So when it was over, it's like these companies were like, okay, back to the office. And they were like, but I'm actually a better employee at home, and I can do, and if they happen to be disabled maybe, or if they have childcare issue or whatever, as long as the work gets done, what is the problem kind of thing. And I think a lot of people are rigid in the way they do things. This is how we've always done it. We will not accommodate or make any changes. And I think that's so archaic.
It is. And during COVID, employment of people with disabilities went up. Like 70 to 80% of people with disabilities are not working. And during COVID, that statistic got so much better because we, as disabled people, number one, don't have to feel forced to identify if we don't want to, because that's a personal choice, right? But we're also in our own environments, able to use the technology that works, have the accessibility of our own bathrooms and like our homes and all of those things. And it is extremely valuable for disabled people to have an option to work from home. So companies, in my opinion, that are completely cut off again, like that is not creating accessibility.
Yeah. I mean, I really think that there are some people who can, as long as if it's not like a office hours situation where they need to be available for customers or whatever. If it's just literally a situation where the work needs to get done, it doesn't really matter if it's between 9 and 5 or whatever, the work just needs to get done. Well, as long as the work gets done, what does it matter?
Totally.
You know, it's crazy because some people are more night owls, some people are morning people, like whatever. Some of us don't come alive until 3 in the afternoon.
Totally.
Some of us come alive at 4 a.m. And so it's just interesting to me that that option would be taken away from them. Okay, so I know many people, they struggle to have these conversations about ableism. You know, because people are afraid to say the wrong thing.
Yeah.
I mean, that's something you and I have talked about. They're afraid to ask the wrong questions. They don't want to upset the person they're asking. You have referred to yourself as a bridge for this conversation to help people believe in things they haven't before. What do you mean by that? Like I think you said something like it shouldn't, or no, people have said things like it shouldn't be your job to teach others.
Yeah. A lot of advocates say that. And depending on the time in my life, I wanted it to be my job or didn't. Like right now in the space that I am choosing this path to share my experiences and the things that I've learned to try to help while I can. And I feel like very strong in that space. But have I always wanted to be a teacher? No. But I've literally lived my life on a stage. When I was young, like my granny would tell me I would stop in grocery stores, fold my arms, and just be tired of being stared at. And I literally am stared at if I'm getting out of the car, putting my wheelchair together, if I'm pushing a shopping cart in the grocery store, or if I'm up on these stages that I'm on. And so I've just gotten to the point in my life where I'm choosing this, and not everybody's gonna want to choose this at all. But I want to create opportunities for others to follow that aren't going to be as difficult, that are going to be more plentiful, that are going to open up and reduce some of the gaps of hiring and low salaries and just all lack of accessibility. And I just have decided to kind of put the breadcrumbs of my life together and do that now. Doesn't mean tomorrow that I'm going to be like, yes, I'm the teacher, but right now that's how I feel. So I'm just leading the way.
Yeah. Well, you're doing a really good job. I think that you take a lot of the, I don't know, you make the conversation easy to have. I don't know what it is. I'm not sure, but I feel like, I get it though. I get like that. on my own very small level, people get uncomfortable and we talked about this too. It's like you can tell when someone's uncomfortable around you and they don't know how to talk to you. They don't know how to ask you. It's similar to sort of how people get uncomfortable. Like if some tragedies happened in someone's lives, they don't know how to ask them about it, whatever it is. It's like people are people, and we have to give grace. But at the same time, those conversations need to be had. So whether it's us inviting them and asking to have them, or it's just us, using our platform to educate so people feel comfortable, taking that initiative. I think that the more we have these conversations, just as we talked about before, the less of stigmatized it will all feel for everyone.
And when I was young, my dad would tell me a lot that this was going to be a tough path and there's going to be a lot of judgments and you're going to have a lot of challenges in front of you, and that I just need to do the best that I can with what I've been given and just try to smile. And I think that he told me smile kind of like allows other people in. And so that also isn't everybody's job, but that is how I lean in with empathy. I try to meet people where they are at. When people are staring at me, I try, if I'm in the mood, I'm not always in the mood, but to look back, maybe smile, give them a wave, to like invite in more engagement rather than just staring and trying to learn something. Yeah. So I'm just trying to further the conversation. I know I'm not going to move mountains, but I'm just trying to help a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah. I love it. Okay. So as we start to wrap up, I just want to give you the floor. If there's anything else that we haven't talked about, or anything that you would like to leave our listeners and viewers with, I'd love for you to share. Sorry, again, on the spot.
I think to just be open to unknowns, to lean into conversations with a little bit of bravery and trust that we're all humans, to offer opportunities to people that you might not have prior, to maybe challenge the status quo a little bit and help with this work. Disability inclusion is part of the diversity conversation in the workplace. There's a lot of work to do and to get done to have its own space. And I think that we just need to be brave in opening up conversations. So I'm grateful for the opportunity, and I have a podcast too, so I want everybody to start following that too, to get more comfortable with the conversation.
And I'm going to I'll leave links for all of that so everybody can follow along. So yeah, I'll leave a link and it's called Pushing Forward
with Alycia.
So I'll leave a link for that in the show notes, along with a link to your website, your Instagram page for anyone who wants to follow your exciting
And if there's
journey.
anybody out there looking for a speaker, call me.
Yes. Very good. Yeah. I have learned so much from you. I'm excited we're connected. I'm excited I get to be on your podcast.
I'm so excited
in like
too.
a week or two at the end of the month. So I'll share that episode on my platform as well when it comes out. So with that, I want to thank you so much for being here. Thanks everybody for listening, and we will see you guys back here next week. Bye. Thanks so much for watching. If you guys enjoyed this conversation, please give it a like and leave me a comment. I want to know what you guys think. Also, if you're looking for more information about how to be a guest on the show, please go to our website at humanityunlockedpodcast.com. We only record shows in person, and we are located in Sacramento, California. Oh, and if you're not subscribed, make sure you tap that button so you can get updated on weekly episodes as they go live. Is that it? I think that's it. See you guys next time.